Whether you're a Christian who occasionally has questions, or you're skeptical but curious.
Well, that's just a little bit hilarious, the kind of accidental admission that only a super smart guy theist lad could ever make. That there's only some small percentage of Christians who ask questions, and when they do, apparently it's not a lot. Yet, when it comes to your immortal soul, should you not be asking questions all the time? Now, obviously, there are ones who are a bit better than that, but I just found it extremely funny that someone would just straight up put it in like that, because it really makes you all sound awful. Also, curiosity is kind of foundational to true skepticism. If you aren't curious about what the truth is, you'll literally believe anything.
You've probably asked the question, is Christianity true?
Asked it, answered it, put it on a t-shirt. If Christianity is true, with its big book of nonsense, its incoherent description of God, and everything else that makes it just not very plausible to say the least, then I am a walking, talking bucket of spaghetti. And everyone knows that buckets of spaghetti are terrible at walking. Unlike me, you ain't seen better walk animations in your whole damn life.
To answer that, we need to look at the two foundational claims of Christianity.
Of course, those two foundational claims that a person needs to answer in the positive in order to accept the claims of the Bible. Those being, will you believe literally anything, and were you dropped on your head multiple times as a kid? Combine those together and you'll get the ultimate Christian apologist, with the power to uncritically accept even the most utterly nonsensical of ideas that mankind has ever come up with. Remarkable.
First, that the Bible is the divinely inspired Word of God. Second, that Jesus lived, died, and rose again to offer salvation to the world.
Oh, that's what's foundational. So all you have to do is prove the supernatural exists, that there is a deity that both has an interest in humanity and also the ability to provide instruction, but only chooses to do so before we had the ability to keep track of factual events, and that people can fully die and be magically resurrected from that absolute death. And all of that in this video that is called something like Christianity Proven in Less Than 5 Minutes, but actually has a runtime of 3, which, well, I'm not sure why you did that. Perhaps you thought 3 sounded a little bit too ambitious. No one would believe you can do that insurmountable shit in such an insanely short amount of time. No, we gotta stick on a couple of extra minutes. That is much better.
These are bold claims, but is there any evidence to support them?
They certainly are bold claims, but my brother in atheismo, this shit isn't about any evidence, because you got to understand, there is evidence for pretty much any claim that you could even think to come up with. That's the thing about evidence. It's not this says one thing and one thing only kind of deal. There is evidence for the flat earth. There is evidence that vaccines cause autism. And as a card-carrying atheist, I am perfectly comfortable admitting that there is evidence for the Bible's claims. Every last one of them. The problem with all these things is that none of it is good evidence. All of it is better explained by other things. You can claim as much evidence as you like, but if it's all garbage and doesn't point as strongly towards your thing as it does to others, who gives a shit?
And to answer that, let's rewind about 1,000 years before Jesus walked the earth. King David wrote a psalm that reveals something extraordinary.
Wow, what a start. I mean, not only are we going with apparently 3,000-year-old texts rather than, some modern way to actually prove any of the things you said we needed, but also the whole David wrote that shit. You say it so matter-of-factly, but as I understand it, that's a pretty controversial take. The idea that he wrote the lot is not exactly something that all or even most biblical scholars would agree on, especially when you consider that much credited to him was written centuries after his death. But hey, maybe the exact thing you're going to quote was definitely his doing. Still, I don't see how that would prove divine inspiration unless he mapped out the human genome, drew up a spec sheet for a CPU, and explained in detail a scientifically accurate explanation as to how the universe formed. Things that he could not have known within his timeline without a hotline to God. Funny that shit never happens.
It paints a vivid picture of suffering, rejection, and ultimately redemption. What's astonishing is that this psalm actually isn't about David's life. It's a prophecy.
Is it a prophecy? As far as I'm aware, at no point does it even claim to be. In fact, it sounds more like edgy teenage brooding, exactly the kind of stories one would absolutely write about themselves if they were going through what they perceive to be a hard time in order to help deal with it. And by perceive, I'm not downplaying the real emotional struggle that you can go through, even if your life is otherwise pretty good. But he was a king, and he killed a boss-level monster while he was still a kid. I would bet if he wasn't so poor me about things, he might have realized at least parts of his life were pretty kick-ass.
As you can see in Psalm 22, verse 14 to 16, it reads, I'm poured out like water, and all my bones are out of joint. My heart has turned to wax. It is melted within me. My mouth is dried up like a potsherd, and my tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. You lay me in the dust of death.
Well, again, that sounds pretty damn first person to me. And again, it's just I'm 14 and this is deep shit. In fact, there's a name for this exact kind of writing. It's called a lament. It's something that people would write in order to express their feelings in words, usually in relation to loss or grief or any other kind of suffering. That's what this was likely about. Again, not some kind of ham-fisted prediction of future quote-unquote events.
Dogs surround me. A pack of villains encircles me. They pierce my hands and my feet. You've probably already started to see the connections.
Connections? Only one of those could even be remotely considered a direct connection to what you're getting at. The crucifixion of Jesus McGoddington. The stabbing, hands and feet. But even that is way too vague to truly be considered a prediction of what would happen in the future space year of 30 to 33. And the rest are pretty dang generic, I feel bad and everyone is out to get me shit. Again, he's just being aggro, and even the piercing thing is exactly the kind of over-the-top horrible imagery one might use to make a point about how shit they feel their life is.
This story is exactly that of Jesus' crucifixion.
No, it isn't. What are you talking about? Again, it's barely even similar, with one thing that could maybe be seen as related to the specifics of crucifixion, but the idea of torturing people by doing shit to their hands and feet is likely as old as, well, hands and feet. Humans are assholes like that. And even if we choose to believe that this wasn't just what it was, a poem to say, damn it, I feel bad, everything sucks, and was instead a story that came to David about some guy having terrible things done to him, that was hardly a unique situation to have popped into one's head, especially not at the time. So the idea that he might have felt the need to write it down because it was so unbelievable a thought seems a little unlikely at best.
In verse 14, we see how he died, which was heart failure. We see the water.
Whoa. Roll that back a goddamn minute. The way he died was heart failure. First off, how the hell could you possibly know that? While sure, the heart stopping and death are pretty synonymous, the idea that you can just say, yep, definitely heart failure, wouldn't you agree, Dr. Dumbass MD, is utterly absurd. As a conclusion from the story as written, not to mention the understanding that even the top quote-unquote medical experts would have had at the time. And the fact that why would they have cared to check what the cause of death was for this criminal that they were executing? Along with the simple fact that when you're crucified, there are a bunch of things that would more likely be your actual cause of death. And all of that is before we try to align this with my heart be like wax. You're pretending that means this guy died of heart failure, as if that's anything other than the vaguest of poetic bullshit. Holy crap, dude, I talked about bad evidence earlier, but this one doesn't even reach those heady heights.
We see the water that was poured out of him when the Roman soldier struck a spear in him, and we see his bones out of joint because he was hanging on a cross.
Even if we decide to be nice and give you all of this, again, vague shit that doesn't describe crucifixion particularly well, and describes many situations similarly, if not way better, the fact that the authors of later texts might reference an older one when writing their new story is apparently completely lost on you. That's the problem with predictions in the Bible. They are near universally fulfilled in the Bible. And even those, by the standard you decided was more than good enough to prove it, is incredibly poor. Oh, and any predictions met outside of the book, those are universally so vague as to be trivial to fulfill. Ones like, an empire will rise, and it will also fall. A thing that happens, literally, all the fucking time.
In verse 15, we see how he was unimaginably thirsty.
Well, I don't see why the fact that mid-execution Jesus wanted to bang would prove anything other than Jesus was a well-known horn dog. I mean, seriously, the guy was constantly followed around by 12 cockblockers. Of course he was going to be gagging for it at the end. Can't imagine any other reason to call him thirsty.
And most importantly of all, verse 16, they pierced my hands and my feet. Psalm 22 predicted Jesus' death on the cross and predicted crucifixion hundreds of years before crucifixion even existed.
That is utter drivel. Ignoring the fact that the piercing translation isn't even agreed upon. Apparently it could also mean lions. The idea that pierced hands and feet somehow automatically means this one specific style of execution is complete and total nonsense. Aside from the fact that it's entirely plausible that people would have nailed each other to wooden posts before the about 500 BCE time period it emerges historically, it again requires a lot more than just one part of the act to be considered the whole act. All the while, people definitely have been sticking shit through people's hands and feet and everything else since the first time one person figured out how much that would suck and then had the desire to do it to someone else. Without the specifics of the, frickin' cross, this is nothing but you trying to fit a square peg into a distinctly cross-shaped hole.
And there's absolutely nothing else that involves piercing of hands and feet in the Bible or in history up to this point.
Assuming that the lack of piercing things in the Bible is even true, even though if we ignore the lame attempt to force this to be part of a prophecy, it is right here, the idea that impalement of any and all parts of the human body as a form of torture, punishment, and psychological warfare never existed until the Bible brought it up is either blatant historical revisionism in a vain attempt to make the Bible sound more novel and unique in its storytelling, or you are so poorly informed in general history that it's amazing that you even understand what the concept of years even means.
Not only this, but Psalm 22 also starts off with Jesus' final words. My God, why have you forsaken me?
Oh, wow. Well, that's nailed it. Get it? I mean, why would a book with repeated themes use the same set of words multiple times? It just wouldn't, would it? It's astounding to me how naive a person has to be convinced by this kind of shit. How you can't seem to grasp the simple concept that your stages are reversed. Davy Boy didn't see into the future and write down a thing. The writers in the future saw the old texts and thought, hey, you know what would be cool? If they said the same kind of thing. It's not divine prophecy, it's writing 101.
And a little bit after that, it also shows that he was faithful to God since birth, sinless.
Sinless, apart from all of the sins he does in the Bible. I mean, I'm sure you would say, no. They are just about interpretation. But when you need Jesus to be sinless because books say so, you're going to have to see all the things that are pretty obviously counter to that as not really sin because Jesus. But that's simply post hoc reasoning mixed with special pleading. He can't have sinned because he was sinless, therefore those sins aren't sins. That is not how that works.
And even that the Father rescued him after he was on the dust of death in verse 19. And what was the result of all these events?
Oh, where to start? Well, at the end, because it's the results. A lot of very silly people, yourself included, saying a lot of very silly things about a book that was very obviously written pretty badly when you really look at it, and acting like it's literally the greatest thing that was ever written, when even if it wasn't complete horseshit, Mob Psycho 100 now exists and is the best thing ever written. Sorry, not sorry. Body Improvement Club for life. Fight on, fight on, fight on.
They made it so all the ends of the earth will remember and turn to the Lord. Not just Israel, which was the common belief at the time, but all of the world.
You freaking kidding? Even on this planet that has an unreasonably high number of Christians, there are 100% people who have never read the Bible. Most of them are Christians. I kid, sorta. But there are people who will have literally never even heard of Jeebus or the Godmans from your book, though. I mean, there are dozens of completely uncontacted tribes in the world for starts, but then also countries that simply hold different ideologies. A person could easily go their whole lives never encountering entering Christianity. But even if everyone on Earth had heard of it, that wouldn't make it true. Just that one of its tenants spread this shit like a motherfucker, pretty sure that was in Matthew, is an extremely effective way to make something be everywhere. But popularity will never equal value. Otherwise, Twilight wouldn't have 5 bleeding movies to its name.
This, my friends, is the complete gospel demonstration 1,000 years before Jesus was even born. What does this mean? Well,
that at best, the people writing the made-up books full of nonsense had access to the previous made-up books full of nonsense. And you see, that's the thing about basing bullshit on older bullshit, is you just get a much bigger pile of bullshit. It most certainly doesn't make them then turn into diamond-encrusted gold in the shape of a giant pile of bullshit. It is still all just shit. And more likely, none of this matches up at all, and people like you just see correlation where there is none because you really, really, really want it to be there.
With all these striking similarities, one can conclude that Psalm 22 is indeed a divine prophecy.
No, you really can't, unless you are just delusional as hell. It is obvious that one has little to nothing to do with the other, and even if they weren't clearly unconnected, having them be would still prove absolutely nothing. Because again, writing requires the ability to read, and if you're following on from one book, there's a real good chance that not only have you read it, but that you will very much be inspired by it and write a bunch of very similar things in your new boy. Otherwise, the Bible would be even less coherent than it already isn't.
God actually inspired David to write this. If God was in it so much that he predicted the biggest moment in human history, we can be assured that he was in it for every part of the text that his people put together.
And there it is, the utter failure of logic that this entire video crumbles around, apart from the rest of it. But this whole thing needs you to presuppose that the resurrection happened at all. A magical event where a guy comes back to life. A thing that had never happened before or since. It must have happened because we wrote it to be like this story someone else wrote in the same freaking tome. So it has to be a real true event for sure. No, that's not how facts work, and more importantly, definitely not how proof works, mate.